With the Voice to Parliament referendum drawing closer, the propaganda efforts of the Yes campaign are ramping up. A common theme I keep hearing from proponents of the Voice is that No voters, who make up about 60% of the country, are apparently stupid or racist.
If it's no, well, we know that the country's racist.
The racist thing. Undesirables, pedophiles, Nazi filth into cookers, so an extreme right-winger.
White and racist.
Spewing the racism.
White racism.
Lunatic fascists.
Eugenicism.
Are specious and increasingly absurd.
Racism and stupidity.
Fascist.
Racism.
The nefarious, Trump-like, anti-Semitic filth, racist nonsense.
Racism expressed.
This racist extremism, idiotic Ku Klux Klan,
Racist and stupid.
racist nonsense.
The police are racist. Most Australians are racist.
To base racism on post-Trumpian right-wing extremism. The whole of Australia needs to be re-educated.
And I'm certainly not a racist.
White boy, no. That evil Marcia Langton. Just sheer stupidity.
It's like, it is. It is a racist country.
Because only a stupid or racist person would say no to a permanent fifth column advisory board made up of radical activists and people who wear whiteface to represent the Aboriginal grievance industry, which they want you to pay for.
Pay the rent.
And for multi-billion-dollar reparations.
I have talked to Indigenous people, and I'm sure others have too, who talk about generations of trauma among Indigenous Australians as a result of colonisation. Whether that means that colonisation continues now is probably a separate question, but would you accept that there have been generations of trauma as a result of that history?
Well, I guess that would mean that those of us whose ancestors were dispossessed of their own country and brought here in chains as convicts are also suffering from intergenerational trauma. So I should be doubly suffering from intergenerational trauma.
In your speech, you claimed some Indigenous organisations, quote, want to demonise colonial settlement. Could I ask you, please, do you believe the history of colonisation continues to have an impact on some Indigenous Australians?
No. I'll be honest with you, no, I don't think so. Positive impact, absolutely.
I can't see why anyone would have an issue with that, right? Due to the historical presence of Aboriginals on this landmass before the arrival of settlers, who built the country into a powerhouse and defended the nation during times of conflict, there seems to be an expectation that non-Indigenous people should cease to exist for any other purpose than apologising, acknowledging and paying the rent.
Pay the rent.
This concept of Aboriginal Zionism is going to magically bring Australia together somehow, according to the Referendum booklet and Qantas VIP Airbus Albo. You as an Australian, according to the media, have no right to be concerned about the implications of giving a minority group a special voice and privileges in all form of government and policy making, based on racial grounds, which effectively seeks to undermine the democratic process. Even though the Yes campaign are trying to push something into legislation on racial grounds, apparently no voters are the ones who are making this about race. Some of you watching this may be familiar with the political agitator named Tom Tanuki, a YouTuber who also ironically writes articles for a news website called Independent Australia, which is kind of funny because he always attacks actual independent people, from defending the pharmaceutical industrial complex during the lockdowns and COVID mandate, to going after women on Twitter who make a case for voting no in the referendum. A referendum, we are told, is grassroots and made up by Aboriginal people, but is actually supported and financed by all of the top 10 ASX corporations in Australia, drafted by a referendum council which is made up of BHP Billiton executives and other corporate elites. Another one of the many lies of the Yes campaign. I guess Tom Tanuki thinks it's okay to support capitalism sometimes, when it suits his political agenda. In his recent video, he attempted to target independent content creators who promote the case for voting no.
And I believe that she was the original maker-upper of a lot of the bullshit that a lot of no-cookers tell each other about what's going to happen that's so bad if the referendum gets up.
He even included me in his video. Tom didn't actually debunk or refute anything that I said. He just called me an anti-Semite and a racist, because that seems to be much easier.
This is, as you can see, the work of an interchangeable fucking anti-Semite and, Reds under the bed paranoia sufferer.
I'm not sure why he thinks calling me these Marxist buzzwords takes away from the validity of anything that I've said in these videos, because it doesn't. Tom Tanuki claims independent vote no proponents resort to lying. But then he goes ahead and makes a very big lie in the first few minutes of his video.
And the UN is mentioned in the document.
The UN is not mentioned in the document.
Tom claims the United Nations is not mentioned once in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. He mustn't have got the memo that the full, unredacted, unexpurgated version of this document, verified by a Freedom of Information request, actually mentions the United Nations 12 times. Tanuki can also no longer rely on the fact-checkers at RMIT Fact Lab to make the false claim that the Uluru Statement from the Heart is only one page, because they were caught out being bias and shills for the ABC, marking them to be ineligible on meta-based platforms like Facebook and Instagram. On his video, where Tom mentions me and my content, I challenged him to a debate. So far it's been ignored, because he is scared to debate people. A lot of people have accused Tom Tanuki of being a coward, and I can give you an actual example of this. Now, this may or may not be true, so take it with a grain of salt. But I have been told this from very reliable people, more than one person. Back in 2019, during the Invasion Day protest in Melbourne, which was promoted by The Guardian, as you can see here, a group of counter-protesters who were celebrating Australia Day showed up. Tom Tanuki, who was in attendance of the Invasion Day protest, wrote about this on Independent Australia, where he claims he was protecting protesters from physical attacks by what he calls far-right parasites, which I guess could mean anyone that celebrates Australia Day. But when I spoke to the people who attended the event, they all tell me that Tom Tanuki, after the event, was being heckled by counter-protesters, and was so scared that he ran away, seeking the shelter of a 7-Eleven convenience store. According to these people, when Tom ran away, he left his girlfriend behind, amidst the crowd of counter-protesters. That to me doesn't sound like the sort of person who could offer anyone physical protection. It sounds to me more like a coward. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why Tom has such a disdain for nationalism, and why he refers to everyone as a Nazi. This is quite rich because Tanuki just put up an even newer video on his YouTube channel, talking about how funny he thinks it is that 10 right-wing teenagers were running away from a much bigger crowd of people hurling projectiles and brandishing weapons.
Oh, look at this one. Ethan's looking very rough. He's got his little flag. He's holding it in hand, running away backwards. Oh dear, he's had a rough night.
Damaging public property in the process. How ironic. This is all coming from a guy who ran away from Melbourne to go live in sunny Queensland with Pauline Hanson. The same guy who promotes the fundraiser of unemployed overweight doxers from the White Rose Society in the very same video. The White Rose Centrelink Job Seeker Society, who demands money from activist journalists who work for the ABC for helping them slander and dox non-left-wing activists over the years. Go figure. I guess they need more money to dox people. These people need to get a job and stop complaining about the lack of censorship on Twitter. To give you an idea of the type of lunacy Tom Tanuki surrounds himself with, let's once again refer to a website he authors for, Independent Australia, who put out an article recently with the headline, "Votes Against the Voice Will Return Us to a White Australia." In the article, we read the following, quote, "A no vote metaphorically banishes Indigenous men and women to the leper colony that is racism. We cannot and must not allow this to happen. A no vote is a victory for a revival of the White Australia policy and a contemporary reimagining of apartheid." Unquote. What an absolute cooker. I'm really starting to think that us no voters don't even need to campaign anymore, because the architects of The Voice, along with many of the prominent Vote Yes campaigners like Tom Tanuki, seem to do our job for us.
Treated
Despite their bloated financing, they are still losing. They have managed to get almost 2/3 of the country against the voice to Parliament with their rhetoric and lies. Now, just on the topic of race and racism, if we were to consider race when voting in this referendum, would that be such a bad thing? Is there something morally bankrupt about Anglo-Celtic Australian people voting in their interests? According to Marxist lunatics like Marcia Langton and Tom Tanuki, it's an unthinkable level of racism that warrants being shamed publicly and cancelled financially. Why is it that almost every other ethnicity in Australia besides white Anglo-Celtic Australians are allowed to have lobby firms, think tank groups and organisations that push for their political expediency? And more often than not, taxpayers usually need to foot the bill in some way, shape or form. Think about how many agencies and groups there are that represent Jewish people, Aboriginal people, Chinese people, refugees, Arabic people, etc., all in our country. These groups are set up for the explicit purpose of promoting policy and causes which benefit them. Of course, Anglo-Celtic Australians have never been the type of people who have needed quotas, victimhood status or lobby groups to represent them. But why would it be considered racist if we were to put our own people first? Isn't that what everyone else is doing? Isn't that the entire purpose of a voice to Parliament, reparations and treaty? Luckily for us, many Australians are waking up to this nonsense and are not going to let Marxist buzzwords like racism hurt their feelings anymore. Many people are starting to realise that patriotism and nationalism is not about hate for others, but it's actually about love for your family, your nation, its history, your people and your culture. And there is nothing wrong with wanting to preserve and protect it. There are a lot of people, even on the no side, who are making this about what Aboriginals want. They reference the Canberra Tent Embassy, Lydia Thorpe, and many other prominent Aboriginal people who are voting no, and using that as a good reason to justify why they're voting no. At the end of the day, all of this is taking place in our Australian Parliament. And the people who stand to lose the most are Anglo-Celtic Australian people, who make up the vast majority of this country. On the topic of the exclusion of Anglos from the voice debate, I want to read a small portion of an article titled "A Voice Referendum," a statement on behalf of the British Australian community by Frank Salter. A link to the full text can be found in the description below. Quote, "The demand for an Indigenous voice to Parliament comes at a time of crisis for Anglo-Australia and the nation as a whole. The demand cannot be considered outside of this context. It is a fire sale being conducted by the arsonists. The history of Anglo dispossession is the context in which a voice is being demanded. That history explains why not one Anglo advocate was included in a consultative process that formulated the voice referendum. The voice proposal fits this pattern by conforming to a globalist anti-Western and anti-national ideology. The exclusion is profound. Commentator Paul Kelly notes that the voice process has offered extremely limited consultation with the public, no constitutional convention, no parliamentary committee collaborating on the model, not even the release of legal advice from the Solicitor General. The process has been more extreme for Anglo-Australians because their representatives have been excluded from participating in a matter of group rights and national origins." Unquote. This is the sort of stuff that I've been reflecting on recently with this Voice to Parliament propaganda targeted against Anglo-Celtic Australians. And then I come across this Tom Tanuki guy who wants to call everybody racist for having their say. At the end of the day, this referendum is going to affect us, our way of life, and our future, and we have the right to be concerned about that. This is why we should vote no. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to share it around with your friends. Be sure to like the video and comment your thoughts below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.